The notion that giants once roamed the earth often conjures images of myth and folklore, tales passed down through generations, dismissed as symbolic or exaggerated accounts. However, in the context of the Bible, these beings, particularly the Nephilim, are described not as metaphors or fictional characters, but as real entities who had a physical presence and significant influence during ancient times. The video delves deep into this topic, arguing that the Nephilim were not mere legends or mythical beings, but historical figures acknowledged and documented within sacred texts. Especially in the Old Testament, the term Nephilim first appears in Genesis 64, where it states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days," and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. This passage introduces the idea that these beings were the offspring of a union between divine or angelic beings, commonly interpreted as the sons of God, and human women. The offspring, the Nephilim, are described as mighty, heroic, and feared, indicative of both their strength and their notoriety among ancient civilizations. This brief but powerful reference implies that their presence was both real and impactful enough to be recorded in one of the earliest books of the Bible. The Book of Numbers, chapter 13, also reinforces the idea that these giants were not just spiritual or mythical concepts but physical beings who could be seen and feared. When the Israelite spies returned from scouting the land of Canaan, they reported, "We saw the Nephilim there." The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. This passage paints a vivid picture of immense physical disparity. The Israelites' reaction was not just metaphorical fear. It was rooted in a visible and tangible confrontation with a race of giants that towered over them, both physically and psychologically. This specific reference also ties the Nephilim to known bloodlines, such as the Anakim, suggesting they were not isolated anomalies but part of larger, established clans that inhabited specific regions. By addressing these scriptural accounts, the video challenges modern interpretations that reduce the Nephilim to allegory or symbolic representation. It argues that dismissing them as myths is a result of contemporary skepticism and a departure from the literal understanding held by ancient cultures, including the early Hebrews. To the people of that time, these giants were as real as the cities they lived in and the battles they fought. Their existence wasn't questioned. It was feared, recorded, and remembered. Furthermore, the video proposes that the frequent mention of giants in biblical texts is too consistent and deliberate to be ignored or explained away. The inclusion of these beings in multiple books, Genesis, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Samuel, suggests a thematic thread that runs through much of the Old Testament narrative. These references form a pattern, hinting at the real, ongoing presence of a race or group that had a direct impact on the unfolding of biblical history, especially in relation to the Israelites' journey and conquest of the Promised Land. Rather than being isolated mythic characters, the Nephilim and other giants like the Anakim, Rephaim, and Zamzummim are portrayed as tangible adversaries, real enemies who lived in fortified cities, and whose strength was a genuine threat to God's chosen people. Their presence even influenced the morale and decisions of the Israelites, as seen when fear of these giants led to rebellion and punishment during the wilderness years. This exploration of the Nephilim as real, physical beings draws a compelling connection between ancient scripture and a forgotten history that might hold keys to understanding human origins, divine interaction, and the deeper narrative of spiritual warfare described throughout the Bible. The Nephilim are often presented in biblical texts as mysterious and awe-inspiring figures, but beneath the surface lies a web of dark secrets that challenge conventional religious understanding and historical interpretation. The video delves into these concealed truths, suggesting that the existence and nature of the Nephilim point to a deeper, more disturbing reality, one that has been veiled for centuries, either intentionally or by the natural erosion of ancient knowledge over time. These secrets do not merely dwell in speculative theology or fringe theories. They are deeply embedded in scripture, ancient law, and historical records, waiting to be unearthed by those willing to confront uncomfortable truths. At the heart of these secrets lies the question of the Nephilim's origin. Genesis 61:4 implies that the Nephilim were born from the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. This passage is laden with theological implications. The phrase "sons of God" has sparked centuries of debate. Are they fallen angels, divine beings, or the righteous lineage of Seth? Many early Jewish texts and ancient Christian writings interpret them as angelic beings who transgress their heavenly bounds, descending to earth to corrupt human bloodlines. If true, this paints the Nephilim not just as large or powerful humans, but as hybrid beings, part divine, part human, whose very existence represented a rebellion against divine order. Such a scenario carries with it profound implications about the boundaries between the spiritual and physical realms and the consequences of their violation. The Book of Enoch, an ancient text excluded from the modern biblical canon but highly influential in early Jewish and Christian traditions, elaborates on this event. It describes a group of angels, known as the Watchers, who descended to earth and took human wives. Their offspring, the Nephilim, became giants of immense strength and insatiable appetites, consuming not only human resources but eventually turning violent and oppressive. This portrayal of the Nephilim aligns with the notion that their existence was not just a biological anomaly, but a moral and spiritual crisis, an act of cosmic defiance that introduced corruption, chaos, and destruction to the earth. This interpretation casts the Nephilim as instruments of evil, not by choice, but by design, a genetic abomination that polluted the human race and provoked divine judgment. One of the darkest secrets surrounding the Nephilim is the possibility that their influence did not end with the flood. While Genesis 6 suggests that the flood was sent, in part, to purge the earth of this corrupted lineage, later passages like Numbers 13:33 confirm that the Nephilim reappeared or somehow survived. This continuity has troubled theologians for centuries and raises uncomfortable questions. Were there other incursions of fallen beings after the flood? Did the lineage persist through other means? If so, could remnants of this hybrid bloodline still exist today, hidden among humanity or even shaping global events in secrecy? The persistence of the Nephilim line, as mentioned in biblical accounts of the Anakim, Rephaim, and other giant tribes in the land of Canaan, indicates that these beings were more than a one-time anomaly. Their continued existence challenges the notion of a clean slate after the flood and hints at a long-term agenda, perhaps one that involves altering humanity's destiny or undermining divine plans. This interpretation introduces a disturbing idea that behind human history, there has been an ongoing spiritual war, with the Nephilim and their progenitors acting as agents of disruption and deception. The video also alludes to the deliberate suppression or reinterpretation of these truths over time. Modern theology often downplays the literal existence of giants, attributing their descriptions to exaggeration or metaphor. Yet, ancient cultures across the globe, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, speak of gigantic beings with divine origins who once walked the earth. These cross-cultural myths may, in fact, be echoes of a forgotten reality, evidence of a widespread phenomenon that religious and political institutions have long sought to erase or spiritualize for the sake of doctrinal control. This suppression, intentional or not, has created a gap in understanding, a blind spot that allows history to be sanitized and sanitized truths to be taught in place of challenging realities. The dark secret of the Nephilim may not only involve their terrifying origin and role in ancient history, but also the possibility that they were part of a larger cosmic scheme, one that threatens to open our understanding of human identity, divine authority, and the battle between light and darkness that continues to this day. The Nephilim are not just intriguing due to their mysterious origin. They are terrifying because of their immense power and the fear they invoked in ancient peoples. This keynote explores their fearsome nature, tracing their roots back to supernatural beginnings and examining how their presence shaped the psychological and spiritual outlook of those who encountered them. The video emphasizes that these beings were more than physically imposing. They represented an existential threat, a genetic and spiritual anomaly that disrupted the natural order and terrified even the most faithful followers of God. The Book of Genesis introduces the Nephilim during a critical turning point in early human history, as divine beings known as the sons of God take human wives and produce offspring. This unnatural union was not merely taboo, it was an abomination, producing creatures that were fundamentally different from either parent species. These hybrids were not just larger humans, they were something altogether other, beings of immense strength, enhanced intelligence, and supernatural influence. Their size alone was formidable, but their hybrid nature gave them abilities and instincts that placed them far above mortal men. Ancient Jewish texts, such as the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, describe the Nephilim as giants who consumed all that humans could provide and then turned to devour human flesh, leading to widespread violence and chaos. These descriptions paint a vivid picture of a world under siege by beings who were not just dominant but predatory. Their power extended far beyond brute strength. The video explains how the Nephilim, through their angelic heritage, inherited forbidden knowledge. The Watchers, those angels who fathered the Nephilim, were said to have taught humanity secrets from heaven: metallurgy, weapon making, enchantments, astrology, and other mysteries never meant for human minds. Through their offspring, this knowledge spread rapidly, altering the course of civilizations and corrupting humanity's innocence. In this way, the Nephilim were not only physical giants but intellectual and spiritual giants as well, standing as symbols of unnatural advancement and the dangers of divine knowledge given to corrupt hearts. This perversion of knowledge contributed to the earth's increasing wickedness, which in turn triggered the flood as a form of divine judgment. After the flood, the fearsome power of the Nephilim reappears in the biblical narrative. When the Israelites prepare to enter the Promised Land, they encounter the descendants of the Nephilim in the form of the Anakim and Rephaim. In Numbers 13:2-33, the spies sent by Moses return in terror, reporting, "All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." This psychological impact is critical to understanding the Nephilim's power. Their presence didn't merely challenge military strength. It shattered confidence, distorted perception, and induced fear-driven rebellion among the Israelites. Despite witnessing miracles in Egypt and surviving the wilderness, the Israelites were paralyzed by the idea of confronting the Nephilim, proving that their power lay as much in their reputation and perceived invincibility as in their actual might. The Nephilim's influence extended into military and political realms. The video highlights how these giants often occupied strategic territories, fortified cities and high places in the land of Canaan. These regions were not random. They were chosen for their spiritual and geopolitical significance. By placing the Nephilim or their descendants in such areas, a spiritual opposition to the divine plan was physically embedded in the land. The Israelites were not merely fighting for territory. They were engaged in a spiritual and ideological battle against corrupted bloodlines and dark powers. The Nephilim were seen as godlike figures by many ancient pagan cultures. Legends of mighty men, demigods, and warrior kings may all trace back to their terrifying legacy. In this way, their power extended beyond biblical accounts and into the mythologies of the world, where stories of titans, giants, and hybrid beings echo the biblical description of the Nephilim. These recurring motifs suggest a shared ancestral memory of beings who once ruled, oppressed, and ultimately terrified early humanity across various cultures and continents. The fear they generated wasn't limited to size or strength. It was rooted in the knowledge that these beings should not exist, and yet they did, standing as monuments to a deeper cosmic rebellion that left an indelible mark on the ancient world. The existence of the Nephilim and other ancient giants is not based merely on myth, legend, or speculation. It is rooted deeply in the textual fabric of the Bible itself. The video highlights that Scripture does not treat these beings as symbolic metaphors or allegorical characters. Instead, it provides specific names, lineages, measurements, and geographical locations tied to the presence of giants, indicating that the biblical authors intended to convey a real and terrifying phenomenon. The references are not vague or isolated, but appear across multiple books of the Old Testament, suggesting a consistent and deliberate acknowledgement of these beings throughout the biblical narrative. One of the foundational references comes from Genesis 6:1-4, where the Nephilim are introduced in the context of a divine, human interbreeding event. This brief yet profound passage states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them." The phrase, "had also afterward," is especially important. It implies that the presence of giants was not limited to the pre-flood world but continued into the post-flood era, reinforcing the idea that the influence of these beings extended across vast spans of human history. This sets the stage for their reappearance in later books, particularly during Israel's approach to the Promised Land. The Book of Numbers provides one of the clearest and most frightening descriptions of these beings. In chapter 13, Moses sends 12 spies into Canaan to assess the land. Upon their return, 10 of the spies deliver a report steeped in fear. "All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." This passage not only identifies the Nephilim, but connects them directly to the Anakim, a known tribe of giants. The spies' overwhelming fear suggests that these were not just taller than average individuals, but colossal and fearsome beings whose presence altered morale and deterred military action. The Israelites' reaction reveals that the giants were considered a legitimate, physical threat, not a symbolic one. Deuteronomy expands on this theme by naming other groups of giants and describing the territories they occupied. In Deuteronomy 20:10-11, the Emim are described as a people strong and numerous and as tall as the Anakim. Likewise, Deuteronomy 20:21 mentions the Zamzumim, another race of giants who lived in Ammonite territory and were driven out by God's intervention. These references are precise and matter of fact, indicating that Moses and the Israelites were fully aware of the existence and locations of these tribes. The consistency with which these groups are mentioned, alongside geographic markers and military events, strengthens the case that they were historical adversaries. Joshua, the successor of Moses, also encountered giants during the conquest of Canaan. In Joshua 11:21-22, it is written that Joshua cut off the Anakim from the hill country. None of the Anakim were left in the land of the Israelites, only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did any survive. These three cities are critical because they later become associated with the Philistines, particularly the infamous giant warrior Goliath. This continuity suggests that remnants of the giant clans persisted even after Joshua's campaigns, eventually integrating into other cultures and lineages. The detailed recording of which cities still housed giants indicates that their presence was not forgotten, but carefully monitored. Another striking piece of evidence comes from 1 Samuel 17, the story of David and Goliath. Goliath is described with specific measurements, over 9 feet tall, and equipped with armor and weapons far beyond the standard of the day. This passage is not written as myth or legend but as a historical event. Moreover, 2 Samuel 21 and 1 Chronicles 20 recount battles with other giant warriors, some of whom are identified as brothers or descendants of Goliath. These stories further establish a lineage of giants, suggesting that Goliath was not unique but part of a larger and ongoing giant heritage. The scriptural evidence is too numerous and too specific to dismiss as mere storytelling. The names, tribes, dimensions, cities, and military engagements involving these beings suggest that the biblical writers considered them an integral part of the narrative, especially in the context of Israel's spiritual and territorial struggles. The repeated mentions of the Nephilim, Rephaim, Anakim, Zamzumim, and Emim across Genesis, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Samuel form a network of testimonies pointing to a historical reality that was deeply embedded in the consciousness of ancient Israel. These giants were not fantasy. They were enemies, obstacles, and remnants of an ancient corruption that had to be confronted and eradicated in order for the divine plan to unfold through the chosen people. The final keynote of the story moves beyond the ancient past, drawing a compelling connection between the giants of the Bible and the realities of the modern world. This is not just an exploration of history or theology. It is a provocative revelation that invites viewers to consider whether the influence of these ancient beings continues in hidden or symbolic forms today. By positioning the story of the Nephilim as a living narrative rather than a closed chapter, the video suggests that understanding their true nature could profoundly reshape our interpretation of the present and perhaps even the future of humanity. The idea that ancient truths are not simply historical, but also prophetic is a key theme. The biblical account of the Nephilim doesn't just serve as a record of divine judgment or ancient warfare. It functions as a warning. The union between the sons of God and the daughters of men was not only a violation of spiritual boundaries, it was the beginning of an existential crisis for mankind. This crisis, though seemingly resolved with the flood, reappears in the post-flood world and, according to many interpretations, may yet return in some form at the end of days. The idea that, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man, Matthew 24:3-7, is a passage often cited to suggest a cyclical pattern of spiritual corruption, divine intervention, and human confrontation with unnatural forces. If the Nephilim were central to the days of Noah, then their legacy may indeed have eschatological significance. The story carefully outlines how ancient spiritual corruptions may have evolved into modern deceptions. It explores the concept that the forbidden knowledge once passed down by the fallen watchers, such as technological advancement without moral restraint, genetic manipulation, and occult sciences, may still be at work in contemporary society. Scientific achievements like cloning AI and transhumanism, while celebrated for their innovation, may represent echoes of the ancient rebellion against divine order. These technologies promise the merging of man and machine, the rewriting of DNA, and the creation of artificial life. Concepts not unlike those initiated by the union of divine beings and human women in Genesis 6. The pursuit of God, like power through human effort, can be interpreted as a reawakening of the Nephilim spirit, the desire to transcend human limitations through forbidden means. Moreover, the persistence of giants in mythologies across cultures, from Sumerian and Greek myths to Native American and Norse traditions, suggests a shared global memory of these beings. These legends, which describe giant kings, sky beings, and hybrid gods, are often dismissed as mere folklore. Yet when viewed through a biblical lens, they may point to the same ancient truth recorded in Genesis. If these stories all stem from a common historical source, then the spiritual and genetic corruption described in the Bible may have had a much wider influence than traditionally acknowledged. The revelation becomes even more striking when considering how modern secret societies, elite bloodlines, and shadow governments are rumored to trace their lineage or ideology to ancient times. Some researchers and theologians speculate that remnants of the Nephilim bloodline may persist through elite families who manipulate global power structures. While these claims are difficult to verify, the symbolism used in occult rituals, architecture, and secretive organizations often mirrors the themes of ancient rebellion and divine defiance. This continuity of symbols and ideologies could suggest that the war between divine order and spiritual rebellion never truly ended. It simply changed form. Another angle explored in the video is psychological and cultural manipulation. The giants of old used fear, domination, and deception to subjugate and control. Today, similar tactics are used on a mass scale through media, politics, and cultural narratives that obscure truth and promote moral relativism. The spiritual descendants of the Nephilim may not be towering warriors with spears, but ideologies and systems that mock divine boundaries and glorify human pride and power. This subtle form of influence, cloaked in sophistication and progress, may be even more dangerous than physical giants, because it seduces rather than terrifies. The video ends by urging viewers to remain vigilant and discerning, suggesting that the ancient confrontation between light and darkness continues under new guises. The Nephilim are not just a curiosity from the past. They may be a key to understanding why our world is changing, why evil often wears the mask of enlightenment, and why the biblical narrative still speaks with urgent relevance today. The story of the Nephilim and the giants in the Bible is far more than an ancient myth or obscure theological curiosity. It is a profound and unsettling narrative that bridges the ancient world with our modern reality. Through scripture, historical texts, and global mythology, a consistent image emerges of beings who challenged divine order, altered human destiny, and left behind a legacy shrouded in mystery, fear, and spiritual consequence. These giants were not merely physical anomalies. They were symbols of rebellion, power, and corruption born from a forbidden union that fractured the natural boundaries set by the Creator. As the biblical narrative unfolds, we see how the Nephilim and their descendants were not wiped away in a single judgment, but resurfaced again and again, opposing the people of God, occupying strategic lands, and threatening divine promises. Their continued presence throughout the Old Testament reveals that the battle between good and evil has always had both a spiritual and physical dimension, one that demanded faith, courage, and obedience in the face of overwhelming odds. The fear they instilled was not just because of their strength, but because of what they represented, the possibility that mankind could be manipulated, redefined, and led astray by forces far beyond their understanding. But the story does not end in the pages of ancient texts. As the video suggests, the legacy of these giants echoes into the present, perhaps not in physical form, but in ideologies, technologies, and systems that once again blur the line between divine order and human ambition. From the manipulation of truth and identity to the relentless pursuit of godlike power through science and philosophy, the spirit of the Nephilim may still linger, influencing, tempting, and distorting the course of humanity. This continuity urges us to look deeper, to question what we accept as progress, and to remain rooted in the truth of Scripture as our guide through uncertain times. Ultimately, the tale of the Nephilim is not just about giants. It is about the condition of the human heart, the dangers of crossing sacred boundaries, and the enduring struggle between light and darkness. It is a call to remember, to awaken, and to prepare, not just for the echoes of ancient battles, but for the very real spiritual challenges that define our age.